Hello my beautiful friends, welcome back to my channel. It is so good to have you back here again for a new episode, and if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking but also very interesting true crime story I have for you today. And of course, please do subscribe to the channel. Now before I get into the case, I have to give out a channel disclaimer, and that is my channel is not meant to show any disrespect towards the victims or the families of the victims that I talk about in these videos. The information that I share with my audience is simply just research taken from different sources of the internet and compiled into one video. And the main purpose of my channel is for educational and awareness purposes of the different types of crimes we face on a daily basis. And the content warning is that in this case, I will be talking about child abuse, violence, as well as sexual assault against a minor. So if you are sensitive to that kind of content, then viewer discretion is very much advised. Alright guys, before I get to it, I have two announcements that I would like to make. And the first one is, after this episode, I will not be here for the next 2 weeks. But don't worry, even in that time off, me and my partner, Lanice, will still be working on some cases that we plan on bringing to you guys once I get back. So even if I'll not be shooting in that 2 weeks, I'll still be working for you guys. And the second announcement is that when I started this channel, I wanted to first focus on uploading 30 South African episodes. And this is now the 30th episode. And now that I've reached that mark, I will be expanding my coverage to cases of other countries as well. So that means I'm going to be covering some international cases as well. As a matter of fact, Lanice already has a case that she has already researched for me to cover when I get back. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some changes happening to the channel. But now, sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the case of the Spring House of Horrors. And you might be left thinking, what kind of normal person does the things that I'm about to tell you about this case? This is the story of Yolanda and how her and her siblings were held captive, abused, and tortured by their own father for almost a decade before they finally got rescued. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a messed up case. Now, the identities of Yolanda's siblings were kept a secret to protect them and to protect their privacy even after they moved on from this whole incident, and also because they were still minors at the time, so obviously their identities had to be kept secret under law. Even the identities of their parents were kept a secret to be able to protect these kids. Yolanda's real name is the only one that was ever released because after this whole thing happened, she decided to write a book about the experiences of her life. So Yolanda's name is the only one that's going to be real in this episode. So in this story, I will be talking a lot about Yolanda, her brother, her mother, as well as her father. So to keep better track of the story, I'm going to give them my own made-up names. But again, remember, these are not their real identities. So we're going to give Yolanda's father the name of Michael, and we're going to give her mother the name of Melissa, and then we're going to give her brother the name of Tommy. Now, according to Melissa, Michael didn't really have the best childhood when he grew up. As a matter of fact, his father was not really the best kind of dad a kid could ever hope for. He was very abusive towards Michael and also very abusive towards Michael's mom. And it was also stated that at some point, Michael ended up being molested by one of his father's friends, and that's how bad things would often get in his childhood. Now, the abuse on Michael's mother was so bad that one day when Michael and Melissa were out on a weekend, Michael's father shot and killed Michael's mother, and then he turned the gun on himself and shot himself as well, but he was found barely alive. But some sources say that it was the mother who shot Michael's father and then killed herself, so it gets a little bit tricky, but essentially that's what happened. Melissa said that after this they had to move out of Michael's parents' house, and once they did that they faced a lot of hardships. At first they lived with some relatives, but then as time went on they started living in their own caravan. Melissa, on the other hand, lost her father at the age of 11, and she said that once her father died, her mother just up and left, abandoning her and her siblings, and they had to take care of themselves. Melissa had to move in with her older sister, and I don't think it would be far-fetched for us to assume that she was even raised by her older sister because her mom, like I said, just up and left the kids once her husband died. In 1996, when Melissa was just 16 years old, she met a boy who was 17 years old at that time, and they started dating. And then after a little while of dating, Melissa decided to drop out of school so she can spend more time with this boy. And this is how she met the man she would spend the next many years of her life with. And this boy was Michael. Later on in their relationship, they got engaged and they decided to move in together. But they moved in at Michael's parents' house. And after this happened, this is when Melissa's sister said that their relationship started getting messed up. Michael started being very abusive towards Melissa, and he would often subject her to punishments like putting her over his lap and then spanking her like you would a child. However, he would do it a lot more painfully. And after the whole shooting incident at Michael's parents' house, like I said, they had to move out. But then after that, they decided to officially get married. And then in 1998, they had their first child, a baby girl they named Yolanda. And after Yolanda was born, the family started moving around the country quite a lot because Michael was pursuing a lot of work opportunities at that time. And as they did this, they still stayed with some relatives, and then sometimes they would stay in their caravan. And when Yolanda was just 5 years old in 2003, her younger brother Tommy was then born. And according to Yolanda, even before Tommy was born, her father Michael always had outbursts of anger. But it's like after Tommy was born, everything got 10 times worse. And a lot of his anger would be directed at his son, Tommy. As a matter of fact, when Tommy was just 3 years old, it is said that Michael would just hit and beat him for no apparent reason. And there was also a time when the family was out on holiday, and then Michael decided to go to a shop to get himself some fries. And when he got back to the car and realized that he forgot to put some salt on his fries, he got very angry about that. And of course, he directed his anger towards his son, Tommy. He beat the boy up, and then he tried to kick him out of the van that they were driving. And then as he attempted to drive off, the boy had to run after the car, and then he had to hold on at the back for dear life. And Yolanda's mother, Melissa, was getting more and more distant as things were happening like this. And you might be wondering why she was letting things happen like this to her children, why she wasn't doing anything about it. Well, it was said that she was also actually very terrified of her husband, and she never wanted the anger that he had to be directed at her. So she felt like if she interfered, then that's exactly what would happen. And her being closed off like this really affected the relationship that she had with her daughter Yolanda, even though at that point it was almost never even there, and Yolanda had to basically raise herself. When it came to Tommy, however, it was said that after his birth, Melissa was a bit, emotionally available for quite some time. However, after that, she started becoming a bit more closed off towards him as well. And then Yolanda was left to take care of her own brother, even though she was also very young at that age. Now, Yolanda was the only one among her siblings who went to school. However, she only went to school up until grade 3. And after that, her father decided to pull her out of school. And I think I should also mention that among her siblings, Yolanda is the only one who ever received any amount of formal education, because she was the only one whose birth was actually ever registered after she was born. The rest of her siblings were never registered. So like I said, Michael pulled her out of school, and his reason was that he wanted to keep her safe from the monsters that were out there in the world. So he didn't want her to keep going out to school and possibly getting in contact with these monsters that he was talking about. And at this time, Yolanda had some friends at school, but she had to say goodbye to all of them. But since she was still very young at that time, she really thought that her father wanted to protect her. So to her, it didn't really affect her that much when she had to lose her friends. Little did she know that she was actually about to be locked in the house with the real monster that she needed to be protected from. Now, between 2009 and 2010, Michael and Melissa had 2 more babies. One was born in 2009 and the other was born in 2010, bringing the total number of kids in this family to 4. And when Yolanda turned 12, that's when she and her family moved to their house in Spring, Gauteng, the house that would be famously known as the Spring House of Horrors, where everything just went to hell very quickly for this family. And as they lived there, Michael worked as a salesman of second-hand cars, and then on the side he would sell scrap metal at his house to make some extra cash. But it was also said that this house that they were living in was actually rented. They didn't own it. But even though they were also tenants in the house, Michael actually rented out the other rooms of the house to other people to make some more money, which was very illegal because again, they didn't own the property. It was also said that Michael was also dealing in illegal substances such as crystal meth as well as cat. And even though he was selling these illegal substances, he and his wife Melissa would often take them themselves. Now Michael was a physically active guy. He liked to work out, so he built himself a gym in one of the rooms of the house where he worked out daily. And it was also said that he took part in some steroids, which unfortunately ended up affecting the way he would control his anger, because he would often become very aggressive towards his family after this. But as you would imagine by now, most of his angry outbursts would be directed towards his children, Yolanda and Tommy. So Yolanda and Tommy always lived in fear of their father. They knew that if he wanted them to do something, they had to do it immediately, and they had to do it exactly the way he told them to. Otherwise, there would be hell to pay. And even when Michael was not in the house, they knew that if they ever got out of line, he would somehow find out, and again, he would beat the living hell out of them. And even though there were now 4 kids living in this house, 4 minors who still needed to be taken care of, whenever Michael would go to work, he never wanted to leave his wife Melissa alone, because in his head, he wanted to stop her from having any funny ideas, so he would always take her to work with him. So this meant that Yolanda had to take care of her siblings throughout most of the day while her parents are out at work. So this meant that Yolanda had to take care of her siblings while her dad was at work with Melissa. Yolanda basically became like a mother to her siblings, and it was said that their relationship was more of a mother and kids type of relationship than a sister and siblings kind of relationship. That's how things ended up becoming for these kids. And to make sure that no one ever caught up to what he was doing, whenever Michael leaves the house, he would instruct the kids strictly to never get out of the house so the neighbors wouldn't see them, or so they wouldn't start asking questions about what's happening in that house. And since these kids were terrified of their father, they would comply with his instructions and they would never ever come out. And it was also said that even when relatives would visit the family, Michael would put on an act of being the best husband and the best father in the world. So even their relatives never knew what was happening in that house behind closed doors. And of course, again, not even his wife Melissa would speak out against him when the relatives visit, because she also was very terrified of him. And as much as Yolanda and Tommy tried to protect their younger siblings from their father's abuse, they were not always successful in their attempts. Because at one point, Michael would just come and kick the 2 young girls that had just been recently born in their faces before they could even see what was happening. So none of them were safe in that house. And then at another point, he decided that he had to keep better watch over his family. And that's when he decided to install some security cameras around the house. And then he knew that all he had to do to watch his family was just sit in his living room and watch the camera footage from his big screen TV. And then he would start reviewing the footage from when he was not at the house to see if the kids ever did anything that was out of line while he was not there. And if he finds even the smallest of issues or the smallest of disobedience, of course, he would subject them to punishment. And it was also said that the family started having some very strange visitors. At one point, there was a woman who worked as a sex worker who came and visited the family, and it turned out that she was one of the friends of Melissa. And this friend of Melissa's ended up becoming one of the illegal tenants of Michael in that house. However, she never slept in these rooms. She would only use them to conduct her business with her clients. And Yolanda said after this, she would often have to clean up after her mom's friend, either before or after she conducts her business with her clients. And then another visitor that Michael brought to the house was a female stripper. And when this woman came by, Michael told the kids to stay in their rooms that night and to never come out under any circumstance. However, Yolanda ended up getting hungry during the night and she needed to get something to eat. So she then decided to get out of the room against her father's wishes to try and go get something to eat. And she said that she ended up seeing this female stripper and her mother running around naked while her father watched, like they were playing some sort of game. So you can tell that these kids had to see some very inappropriate things from a very young age. Now, Michael and Melissa didn't really have a good sexual relationship, and it was actually said that at some point Michael would sexually assault his wife because he wouldn't take no for an answer. And this was because, according to him, as a man, he believed that his wife could never say no to him, and he should therefore get sex from her whenever he wanted it. And there would also be times when Michael throws some very strange parties at his house, and most of these parties would end up being turned into orgies. And even though Yolanda was still a minor, she would be forced to tend to the guests of his father while all of this was happening. And whenever she got tired, it was said that this was when her father started subjecting her to some illegal substances to try to keep her awake. I'm sure by now you just gotta see how sick this guy is. But things were about to get worse for these kids, because at one point Michael had a visitor, and it was a friend of his. So while the friend was there, the kids apparently did something that Michael was not happy about. But before he punished them, he went on to go ask his friend what he would do as a punishment to these kids. And that's when the friend went online and started searching for different torture methods. And that's when he came across the method of waterboarding. And for those of you who may not know what waterboarding is, trust me, it is one of the most painful torture methods you could ever experience. Basically, the person being tortured would have to lie down either on a table or on the floor, and then a towel would get placed on their faces, and then water would get poured all over their faces while the towel is covering them. And this would make them feel like they're drowning, and it would be very painful because they would be struggling to breathe. And if this is done for a long period of time, the person could end up dying from suffocation. And this torture method is actually described as very painful even to grown adults. So imagine what it did to these kids, and unfortunately that's exactly what Michael did to them. And then after this, Michael became obsessed with torturing these kids in any way that involved water. He would submerge their heads underwater as if he was trying to drown them, and then he would also pour very cold water on their bodies before and after he would beat them. And then he would also force them to sit in an ice cold tub of water in winter while it's freezing. And he did this for his own sick and twisted amusement. And it was said that he would save the worst punishments for his son, Tommy. He would take Tommy and then he would tie him up on a pole, and then he would pepper spray him, and then he would beat him up afterwards. And it was also said that at some points he would even leave him there overnight. He enjoyed electrocuting, pepper spraying, beating, and torturing both Yolanda and Tommy. And again, Melissa would just be standing there and watching because she was afraid that all of this would also be directed towards her. There was a time when Michael thought that the police were actually after him for all of his illegal substance dealings. So he then instructed his son Tommy to sit in front of his big screen TV so he can watch his security footage for hours to make sure that no one would be coming after him. And of course, the boy got bored of this, and then he decided to make the mistake of changing the TV. And once his father found out about this, he got very angry about it, and then he smashed an entire television set on the boy's head, and he almost took one of his ears clean off his head. And then after this, Michael told his wife Melissa to take the boy to the hospital. But then as Melissa and Tommy were waiting at the hospital, Melissa started getting anxious and felt like they were there for too long, and so Michael could start getting angry, wondering where they were. So before the boy could even get any help, that's when Melissa decided they should go back to the house and they could try to fix this boy on their own without any doctor's help whatsoever. So as you may have guessed, it became Yolanda's job to try to fix up her little brother. But since she was not experienced in this because she was also still a child, she couldn't fully repair her brother's ear. And because of that, Tommy was left permanently damaged on one of his ears. And again, I think it was just Melissa's fear that got her to leave before the boy got any help at the hospital. Because if you remember correctly, she suffered the abuse of her husband before even these kids were born. As a matter of fact, Yolanda said that at one point she remembers her father, Michael, chasing her mother with a knife around the house. And when Melissa eventually got tired of running, she stopped and then Michael stabbed her on her backside. And then he took her to the hospital, but then surprisingly, no one was asking questions about how this happened. He just told them that it was an accident, and they left it at that. When Yolanda was 16 years old, one of her younger sisters got an injury on her toe. And so because of this, Melissa had to take her to the hospital. So Yolanda and her other siblings were left at home with their father, Michael. And then after this, Michael called Yolanda over to his room, and then when she got there, he told her to take her clothes off. And this is when Michael started sexually assaulting his own daughter. And whenever she would try to refuse, he would intimidate her into giving him what he wants. And this happened over a period of a few months. And during this time, he would also start having inappropriate sexual conversations with his daughter. And then at one point, he forced her to watch some pornography. Again, that is how sick and twisted this man was. Then on May 20th in 2014, Michael wanted to have some takeouts for dinner. And then he started looking for his car keys, but he couldn't find them. And as he was doing this, he was starting to get annoyed and very angry. And Tommy knew that once this happens, he was going to be blamed for it because he was the one who was using the car earlier on. So without even thinking twice about it, Tommy decided to run out of the house to go hide somewhere in the yard. But eventually, Michael ended up finding the car keys and then he drove out to go get some takeouts. And this is when Tommy climbed over the wall and then he fell into the neighbor's house. And this was the house of Mr. and Mrs. Fenter. Mr. and Mrs. Fenter were about to go to sleep that night, but their 18-year-old daughter was still awake because she was still busy on her phone when she heard the dogs barking loudly outside. Mr. Fenter then went downstairs to go and see what's really happening, and that's when he and his daughter went over to the sliding door to go and see who was outside. And when they did, they saw a young boy with torn up clothes standing outside with wounds all over his body, asking them to not tell his father that he is there. They took the boy in and then they gave him some warm clothes to wear because we all know how cold it is in South Africa around May. They started realizing that this was Michael's son, and when they tried to call child welfare, they couldn't get anyone to pick up the phone, and so they were left there wondering what they could possibly do about this. And as they were still trying to figure out what to do, that's when Yolanda knocked on their door to try to get Tommy back home. And when they opened the door after she knocked, they realized that she had a very terrified look on her face because she knew what her father would do if he ever found out about this. However, as she was trying to get the boy back home, Michael ended up coming back and he ended up finding out what happened from his wife, and he got very angry about this. And when he went to his neighbor's house, he just barged in without saying anything, and then he went to Tommy, who was sitting on the couch, and then he just slapped him across his face, and then he grabbed him and then dragged him out of that house, saying to him that he was going to kill him. And when they got to the house, Michael beat up the boy so badly that one of his eyes was swollen shut. But then on the next day, Mrs. Fenter decided to call the police and also child welfare. And just a little after that, over 17 police officers and 3 social workers were outside Michael's home trying to find a way in. And when they finally got into the house, the first person they came across was Michael's wife, Melissa, and she was trying to distract them so Michael could hide Tommy in one of the roofs of the rooms that his illegal tenants lived in so they wouldn't have to see what he did to him the previous night. And at this point, Michael and Melissa had 5 kids. Remember, at one point it was just Yolanda, Tommy, and their 2 younger sisters. Well, it turns out that Melissa ended up getting pregnant at one point and gave birth to a baby boy. So the police and the social workers then reported that there were 4 kids that were taken out of the property, but then the 5th one was still nowhere to be found. And of course, the 5th kid was Tommy. They started looking around the place and they saw just how messy it was. It definitely wasn't sanitary, and it definitely was not a safe environment to raise 5 little kids in. One of the social workers said that the 4 kids were clinging onto their older sister like she was their own mother, and that the 16-year-old girl was actually dressed in clothes that were very inappropriate for her age. The police discovered that the place was just littered with alcohol bottles and that it also smelled of cigarettes. Another social worker also noted that the place was infested with rats, some very big rats, so it was also a very high risk to these kids' health. Then the third social worker also noted that the place was also filled with used needles, and on top of the pool table were some very inappropriate women clothing. And there was also a lot of pornography that was found all over the place, so it was just a giant heap of mess. Yolanda then talked about how she thought life was always supposed to be like this, because according to her, everything was just normal, because again, she never knew anything else growing up. In her mind, she thought that's how every other family lived, so that's how much her father messed up with her mind. In her own words, she said, "Our circumstances were normal to us. Why would I ever run away?" That's because she didn't know anything else apart from the life that she was born into. Michael tried to run away from the scene, but then not long after that, he ended up coming back. But when he was questioned about his identity, he tried to play it off as if like he was not the man they were looking for. But eventually, he ended up admitting that he was indeed the man of that house. And then eventually, Tommy ended up being found. Then both Michael and Melissa ended up being arrested and put into custody. And then all 5 kids were taken to receive better care. Michael was arrested for over 22 charges, which included child neglect, child abuse, sexual assault against a minor, torture, obstruction of justice, as well as defeating the ends of justice. And that is just to name a few. And of course, this maniac pleaded not guilty to all the charges that were laid against him. A psychologist who testified as an expert witness in the case testified that Michael was actually a psychopath and a sadist. A sadist being someone who finds pleasure in the pain, misery, as well as humiliation of other people, and I think you and I can also agree to that. Michael ended up refusing to testify in court, but his wife Melissa had no problem taking the stand, and when she testified, she started talking about the hardships that they faced after they had to move out of Michael's parents' house when the whole shooting incident happened. And as she was doing this, for some reason, Michael ended up crying like a baby in court. And when she was questioned about why she never did anything to protect her kids, that's when she admitted that she was so terrified of her husband that she was scared of what he would do if she ever tried to get in his way. And this was also backed up by a discovery that Melissa was suffering from battered woman syndrome, which is a psychological condition that a person experiences in an abusive relationship with an intimate partner. It would cause this person to be so afraid of their partner that they would never be able to stand up to them. And it would often cause the abuse victim to believe that it was their own fault for being abused in the first place. Another discovery that was made was that Melissa would often take part in the abuse of her children, but this was defended by the fact that she was so scared of her husband that she didn't want to defy his orders, and she did everything to please him. But weird enough, she actually stayed by her husband's side during the trial. They would often be seen holding hands, talking together, and trying to calm each other down throughout the whole thing. This made experts believe that Melissa was also suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, which is a condition whereby victims of abductions or abuse end up developing empathy or feelings for their abductors or abusers. And it's described as a coping mechanism for a person who's being abducted or abused just so they wouldn't have to deal with the real situation that they're in. Their kids also testified in court, but of course for their own protection it had to be a video recorded testimony, and it was done in a separate room where their parents could not see them. And it was only Yolanda and Tommy who testified because at this time they were old enough to speak about what happened, and their other siblings were just too young to talk about what happened in their family. Michael ended up being found guilty of all charges that were laid against him, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison, which I don't think is nowhere near being enough considering what he put these kids through. He should have received life in prison instead of just 35 years in prison. He ended up writing a statement that he wanted to say to his children, and this is what it said. "I just need 2 minutes to tell my children that I am sorry. I love them and I will never give up on them. I hurt them and I don't know why I did it. I was stupid and idiotic and I cannot understand why I did it." Melissa was also found guilty of child neglect, but she was not found guilty of child abuse. She was then sentenced to 5 years probation, which means she was still a free person, but if she ever got in trouble with the law, she would be sent to prison in that 5-year period. She and Michael ended up getting a divorce, and they both started new relationships. So now the nightmare of living in that house was finally over for these kids. But a new journey of self-healing and self-reinventing was about to begin, so these kids can finally heal from the trauma that they suffered at the hands of their father. In therapy, one of the kids was reported to have said that her parents were actually dead. And when she was given gloves to go hit a punching bag as some form of therapy exercise, she kept shouting, "I hate you. Jesus didn't make you. The devil made you." So that's the kind of anger that these kids had inside of them because of all those years of abuse and torture by their father. The 3 younger kids were put in a children's home, and their older siblings, Yolanda and Tommy, were taken in by 2 separate foster families. And even though it was difficult at first, Tommy ended up making some great progress. However, the anger that he still had towards his parents still remained, and he said that he will never forgive them. Of course, we do understand considering everything that he went through. And Yolanda also ended up thriving in the new family that she was living in. And she said at first she never got why people were so angry at her father, because she thought that everything was just normal when she was growing up like that. But once she started experiencing the love and care of her new foster family, that's when she knew that the monster that she was actually supposed to be protected from was actually her father. She's now a beautiful young woman, and she ended up going on to write a book about the experiences that she had at the hands of her father. And the book is called The House of Horrors. And she also said that she actually forgave her father, but she never did it for him. She was doing it for herself so she can regain the power of her own life. And I honestly hope that one day Tommy will be able to do the same. Forgive not for his father, but for himself, so he can also have the full control of his life back. But yeah guys, that was the case of the Springs House of Horrors, where a father meant to be a symbol of protection for his family ended up being the very thing that his family needed to be protected from. And I'm not gonna lie to you, this case got me emotional. Even while I was researching it, hearing about the things that these kids went through, I really couldn't take it. It's really messed up what this man did to his family. Well, that is all that I have for you guys on this week's second episode. Please do let me know your thoughts about this one in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed the episode, please do give it a thumbs up by pressing that like button. It would seriously help me out. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. And as always, your support is what keeps me going. And again, if you are new here, please be part of the family and subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. That being said, I will see you guys in the next episode, which will be again in 2 weeks. Remember, I'll only be back in 2 weeks, but I'm going to miss you guys. So I'll see you guys in the next episode. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day, take care of yourselves, and cheers.